Yeah, this is definitely a a controversial topic. A lot of topics within the Christian church generate a lot of heat as well as light. And the issue of the existence or non-existence of the devil is definitely an example of that. People of good faith have genuine disagreements about this, but I want to start with this. I think that there are things that both sides of this argument can agree on, if nothing else. Number one, when you get right down to the brass tacks, the Bible simply doesn't speak about the origin of the devil. It assumes the devil's existence. We don't know where the serpent in the Garden of Eve came from, okay? There are some passages, I think in Jeremiah and Ezekiel, no, Isaiah and Ezekiel, I'm sorry, which may give clues, but we ultimately don't know. Remember that the Bible also assumes God's existence. It doesn't prove God's existence. So I think we can start with that. Number two, that the ultimate foundation on which we try to prove our point needs to be the Bible. And to the great credit of those who take the opposite position that I do, they do try to make their arguments biblically based primarily, and I do appreciate that very much. Let's try to make that our ultimate foundation. Number three, there are legitimate questions that both sides on this issue will raise, and I think that both sides need to try to consider these questions in good faith, okay? Number four, both sides of the argument, and this is a hard one for people because we all have egos, we don't want to look foolish, but the simple fact is we need to be ready with answering a question with a very simple, I don't know. I don't know. There is no shame whatsoever in admitting that you don't have all the answers. There are people out there, conventional wisdom among some, they're going to say, well, if you can't answer every single one of my questions, then you must be an idiot, and so on and so on. No, we don't want to go down that road. I was told by Brother Carlos that there will be a brief question and answer time after this. You know what? You might pose some really good questions, and I might simply have to say, I have no idea. I appreciate the questions, but I'm going to be honest with you too. If I think I have an answer, I'll give you one. If not, there's no shame in saying that I don't know. Number five, while the Bible needs to be our foundation for what we know, I don't think that it is foul play to talk about the happenings in the world, because let's be brutally honest, guys, we live in a strange world. We live in a very unusual world. If you want to look at it on a more humorous standpoint, the duck-billed platypus is a perfect example of a strange world. If you want to look at it on a more serious topic, the issue of firsthand accounts of hauntings. Skinwalker Ranch is a good example of this. Listen to a podcast about that place. Very weird things that are going on in places like that are not easily answered from a natural standpoint. But nevertheless, both sides we can still agree that we live in a very strange world. Not a bad world, just a strange world. Number six, I don't think that Christians should be shy from learning about the workings of the world, but we do need to be careful exactly and precisely what it is that we learn. Deuteronomy 29:29 is key here, and I hope to wrap up my presentation with this verse as well. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law. There are things which the Lord God told us don't handle, don't deal with it. We are called to our own areas of influence and not to reach beyond things that are beyond our comprehension. That would, when it comes to this topic, mean that we don't mess around with trying to learn things such as tarot cards, seances, etc., etc. But at the same time, I also think it's important to remember the words of Sun Tzu from his book, The Art of War. If you know your enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. When it comes to knowing your enemy, what is it that we need to know? Well, you can understand your enemy without having to dive deep. And in the case of Satan, we can understand him simply from one verse that Jesus says. In John chapter 10, verse 10, it says that the thief comes to do three things: to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Once you understand those three things, you'll understand how and why the devil, whoever or whatever it is, operates. We need to remind ourselves that the devil cares nothing about who he steals from, who he kills, or who he destroys. When Molech wants his blood, he doesn't care whose blood it is. It can be an enemy of his, it can be a follower of his. It doesn't make any difference. But understand that. And that's all you need. That's really all you need to know when it comes to your dealings with our enemy. And the last thing, and I want to credit Brother Larry Mayberry from the Carolinas for reminding me of this. I knew this, but it was still good of him to remind me of this. We need to remember that whoever or whatever the devil is, the ultimate responsibility for our sin must lie with us. If there is a supernatural being called Satan, the only thing that he does is deceive and tempt. He doesn't cause you to sin. How many of you in here listening to this presentation remember the very popular comedian Flip Wilson from, I think it was very popular back in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s. Those of you who remember Flip Wilson will remember his famous line, "The devil made me do it." Now, that's a funny line, especially Flip Wilson was a very funny man, and the way that he brought about that delivery was a beautiful thing. But nevertheless, that isn't the case. We are responsible for our own sin when you get right down to it. Don't be afraid to admit your bias, okay? I'm not going to deny my bias on a topic like this, that I do believe that a supernatural being who has the title of the devil or Satan does exist, and he deceives the world. If I didn't believe this, I would readily admit to you that I did not. Neutrality is virtually an impossibility when it comes to just about any biblical topic. And so when someone comes up to you, and whatever issue it might be, and tells you, hey, we need to have a completely objective and neutral discussion on this topic, you need to remember these two things. These aren't mine, by the way. I remember hearing a commentator say this. Number one, the other person is not neutral, and they never are. And number two, you shouldn't be either. The simple fact is you can't avoid bringing biases and preferences into the discussion. And that is, in my personal judgment, perfectly okay to admit that ahead of time. Now, in order to do this, I think it would be important for us to define our terms. I try, I'm not saying I'm always successful in doing this, but I try to look at issues, especially biblical issues, from a foundational or from a very basic level. And included in this would be making sure that we define our words and our terms properly. Because if we don't get the basics right, if we don't start with God's premises, but instead start with the world's premises, if we don't define words truthfully, then we're going to end up coming to bad conclusions or wrong conclusions. And to everybody here who is going to be giving presentations later on, I hope that you'll do this as well, that you remember you need to start somewhere and make sure that that somewhere is a firm foundation. Just like Jesus' parable of the Sermon on his parable in the Sermon on the Mount about the wise and the foolish builders. There is a massive difference between the one who builds his life on basic truth and the one who builds his life on lies and deception. The rock versus the sand. So let's start with definitions. What does the word devil and Satan mean? From Strong's exhaustive concordance of the Bible, yes, I still use hard copy books. I looked it up. I'm not very good when it comes to trying to pronounce Greek words or Hebrew words, so you can look these up for yourself. In the New Testament, word number 1228 is defined as false accuser, devil, or slanderer. And word number 1140 refers to a demonic being, by extension, a deity, a devil, or a god. This word is also, interestingly enough, translated as demons in most more modern English translations of our Bible. If memory serves, the King James Version translates this as devil. So you have devil and devils with a plural. In the Old Testament, the title of Satan, word number 754, means an opponent, Satan, the arch enemy of good, adversary, or withstand. Whereas the word Satan in the New Testament, in the Greek language, the word there is number 4567, which means the accuser or the devil. From these terms, what can we put together? What can we piece together? Whoever or whatever this devil is, he stands in opposition to God and his holiness. He withstands good and promotes evil. He accuses falsely and slanders those who belong to God. And he does have a level of power, being a god, small g god of sorts. And let's not get thrown off by this. Brother Dan Gill mentioned Psalm 82 in his presentation on the preexistence of Jesus. Well, there are times when God gives the title of God with a small g to others. God did this with Moses. In Exodus 7:1, he said, "See, I have made you God to Pharaoh, and Aaron will be your prophet." And then, of course, Psalm 82, where the Lord, Yahweh, calls human judges gods and sons of the Most High. Most High. Jesus alludes to this psalm and his controversy over whether he is the Son of God or not in John chapter 10, verses 34 and 35. You know, if God can call human judges gods, then it is no thing for Christ to call himself and to be the Son of God. So don't let that throw you off. You know, there is one God who is Yahweh. He will not give his glory to another, but he can and will give his title and authority and power to others. Another one that popped in my mind is in Exodus 23, where he speaks to Moses and said that I will send my angel before you. You need to do what he says because my name is in him. So the angel is acting on behalf of Yahweh God. Now, I've only done a fairly basic reading of folks who do not believe that the devil is a personal being, but instead they will consider it a synonym or representation of sin and so on and so on. I've done enough, though, that there seems to be, from what I have read, 3 weaknesses of the no devil position. I'm going to sum them up. I'm going to quickly go over them here, and then I'll try to give a more detailed explanation for either of them over the next several minutes. But number one, they don't show that the only source of evil is the unregenerate human condition. Number two, they make the assumption, and by the way, as I note here, this is not unique to just folks who do not believe in the existence of the devil. I think all of us fall into this trap at some time or another. But they make the assumption that because we know more now than our ancestors, therefore we must be more intelligent than our ancestors. And I'll get to that more in just a moment here. And number three, that Jesus would use the terminology of the day instead of simply stating what is actually going on. Why, for example, would Jesus say, or anybody else say, he has a devil in him or there's a demon in him, when he could just simply say, well, he has a mental insanity? Why did he play along with that? Now let's look at number one here. They do not show that the human condition, pardon me, guys. You have to excuse me. Because of past health concerns, I have a little bit of a problem with the back of my throat. So my apologies ahead of time for coughing. But number one, as I said a moment ago, they don't show that the human condition is the sole solitary source of sin. Now, to the credit of them, they do emphasize that the human condition is a source of sin. The book of James speaks about this. When people give into temptation, they give birth to sin. When sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death. That is definitely true. But how does that in of itself negate the existence of the devil? In many ways, what I see here is it reminds me of the worldview conclusions that a theist, a believer in God, will have as opposed to an atheist, a non-believer in God. The theist can appeal to both the natural and the supernatural to explain something happening in the world. Now, does that mean, using this example, does that mean that when the theist sees something going on, that the supernatural should be the first explanation? Not necessarily. He should look for natural explanations first about whatever it might be. And only when all of those explanations are no longer feasible can then the theist be wise to then look to the supernatural. The creation evolution debate is a very good example of this, where the one who believes in creation, like myself, we look at natural explanations first, but if we don't find a natural explanation, we can appeal to the supernatural when necessary. Whereas the atheist can never do this. He can only look at natural explanations. If I see a tree fall in front of my lawn, for example, I'm going to look for things like the maybe it had rotted out and was just going to collapse, or maybe termites got to it, or maybe somebody cut it down, or maybe there was a strong wind that came through our area that was powerful enough to blow the tree over. I'm not going to automatically assume that the reason why the tree got knocked over was because an angel knocked it over. But if I go through all of those other reasons and find nothing that satisfactorily explains why the tree fell over, well, I can look and then say, well, maybe something supernatural did happen here. The atheist cannot do this. He can only appeal to the natural because, as I believe one of their heroes, Carl Sagan, once said, the universe and matter is all there is, all there ever was, and all that there ever will be. They can never appeal to anything outside of the natural world. I look at the belief in the devil in the same way. We can appeal to the supernatural, but only after we have tried to look through all of the natural explanations. When something weird happens at a place that's purported to be haunted, or whatever it is, whatever. Maybe there was lightning in the sky. Maybe it was a weather balloon or sleight of hand. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I have never once in my life ever attributed magic tricks by popular past magicians such as Harry Blackstone or David Copperfield or Harry Houdini or any of those others. I've never ascribe them to the devil. There is a reason and there is a method to how they're able to do such things. But as I said before, if we exhaust all those options, we can then say, well, maybe something else is happening here, whereas the non-believer and the devil can't do this. He has to continually stay within the natural world. That being said, we do need to be very careful here. because I strongly agree with with those who take the no devil position. You don't want to abuse this doctrine. It's very easy to take this too far. There's this quote from Augustine, the theologian that lived back, in the third or fourth, I think in the 4th or 5th century. He says here, quote, all diseases of Christians are to be ascribed to demons. Chiefly do they torment the freshly baptized, yes, even the guiltless newborn infant. No. Okay. He should read my favorite Old Testament author in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 11. We live in a fallen world, guys. The race is not always to the swift, nor the battle to the strong. Neither does wealth go to the learned, food to the brilliant, or favor to the wise, but time and chance happen to them all. I have, in my lifetime, had cancer twice. And in neither of those cases did I or anybody else say that the reason why I had cancer was because I was subject to demonic persecution. I live in a fallen world just like everybody else does. And because of that, things like this are bound to happen sooner or later. Augustine's words are an example of taking this too far. I was reading in Ron Abel's excellent book, Wrested Scriptures. He recorded an account of a woman in Canada who received a ticket for driving on the wrong side of the road. And she said that the reason why she was on the wrong side of the road was because of demonic influence. Once again, no, I'm not buying that. You drove on the wrong side of the road because you drove on the wrong side of the road. There's no need to appeal to the supernatural when you make a screw up like this. And by the way, I could also turn it around and say that, the reason why I drove on the right side of the road is because of the finger of God. No, I drove on the right side of the road because that's the right side of the road. We do not ever want to jump the gun when it comes to misdiagnosing someone. There are similarities between the mentally insane person, how he or she may act as opposed to a demon-possessed person. I agree with that completely. And in many cases, what we may think is demon possession could in fact just be mental illness. However, that leads me to the second weakness. We must not make the mistake of thinking that because humanity knows more, we have far more accumulated knowledge, that this therefore means that we are more intelligent than our distant ancestors. And we also should not make the assumption that our distant ancestors did not know about insanity and mental illness. If this were true, then the playwrights of today should make Shakespeare look like a first grader, and yet where are they? I think it vastly underestimates the tremendous intellectual and engineering achievements of our ancestors. I wonder to myself if this attitude is a big reason why people say that, aliens must have built the Great Pyramid of Giza, or they must have built Baalbek, or they must have erected this tomb, or whatever it might be. Because our idiot ancestors wouldn't know the difference between a hammer and a saw. And by the way, I'm not setting up a straw man when I say this. I have seen and heard this attitude expressed in all areas of life, even by believers in Jesus. Now, are there examples of mental illness and insanity in the Bible which were not ascribed to demons or to the devil? While the first one is not necessarily insanity per se, they recognized that what David was doing here was, he was a madman. If you read in 1 Samuel 21, David is on the run from Saul, and he goes hiding among the Philistines. While he was there, he became afraid of Achish, the ruler of Gath, the city of Gath. He was the king of Gath. So what does David start doing? Well, he starts acting like a madman. He starts drooling all over his beard and scribbling all over the doors and this and that. And how did the king of Gath respond? He didn't say that he was demon-possessed. He flat out said that David is insane and a madman. They may not have had a fancy scientific term to describe the kind of insanity that David was pretending to have, but they did not believe that he was possessed. They believed that he was just flat out crazy. The second example would be King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. You guys remember this account in Daniel chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar is warned by Daniel that if he doesn't repent of his pride, that God would take away his sanity and he would live like a wild animal for 7 years. Unfortunately, Nebuchadnezzar did not listen to Daniel, and 12 months later, he went crazy. Did a demon enter into Nebuchadnezzar? No. He was struck with insanity. When you read verse 34 of Daniel 4, Nebuchadnezzar himself says that my sanity was restored. Not the evil spirit left me and I was restored. Verses like this do show that the ancients did understand what mental illness and insanity are as opposed to spiritual possession. Being uneducated is not the same as being stupid. And again, I want to emphasize this. I'm not only calling out non-believers in the devil for having this attitude. We've all had this attitude at one time or another. I've had this attitude one time or another. But they didn't need to know precise scientific terminology such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, epilepsy. They didn't have to have access to CT scanning in order to know the difference between physical and mental ailments as opposed to actual spiritual attacks. The third weakness that I have seen is that Jesus, being truth personified, would not have perpetuated myths. Why would he, as well as his Father, continue to perpetuate a lie that teaches the existence of a spiritual being called the devil and fallen angels or demons, but instead just simply come out and say that this man or this woman is suffering from mental insanity or is mad, as they probably would say back then? 1 Corinthians 14:33, God is not the author of confusion, but of peace. That's the King James. I really like the way that the King James Version translate that passage. God is not the overseer of confusion. He is not a God of disorder, but is a God of order. And I'll reiterate this, that people back then, even common people, knew that insanity and madness existed back then. And if there is no such thing as a supernatural being called the devil or Satan, then why didn't Christ simply say so? Why didn't you simply say so? We don't want to run the danger of portraying Christ Jesus as someone catering to myths or non-existent pagan entities. I also want to go after a stereotype as well, speaking of which, because the stereotype of demon possession is not always correct. When we think about people who are being attacked by demons or demon possessed or whatever it might be, we tend to have this thinking that the person is going to start acting like a wild man, a wild raving lunatic, and I mean, I'm not trying to make a joke out of it, but you understand my point. But that isn't always the case. Look at Judas Iscariot, for example. It does say in John chapter 13, verse 27, that Satan entered into him. And when you read the gospel accounts of Judas, does he ever act like a raving lunatic or a madman, even in his suicide? Did he act desperate? Yes, he did. But desperation is not necessarily insanity, is it not? And not all examples of insanity or demon possession is going to result in a person screaming and yelling and doing things, self-bodily harm, doing things without a thought, doing things on impulse. Sin in general, and I want to touch on the issue of suicidal tendencies for a moment. I'm not convinced that these are always the product of an insane mind or of a demon-possessed mind either. For my evidence of this, look at a man by the name of Ahithophel. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He was a counselor to David, to King David, and then he joined the rebellion of David's son Absalom in the book of 2 Samuel. In fact, the last verse of 2 Samuel 16 says that in those days, Ahithophel's counsel was like receiving the counsel of God. Okay, very wise man, very knowledgeable man, very insightful man. And he gave Absalom a plan of attack on how to go about taking care of his father David and ending this rebellion once and for all. Absalom did not follow that advice. He instead followed the advice of another one of his counselors, who, by the way, when you read that account, he was actually an insider. He was actually a spy for David. And it says here in verse 23 of 2 Samuel 17 that when Ahithophel saw that his latest and soundest advice had been spurned, basically it was at that time he realized that the rebellion was over and he was going to lose. So look what he did here. He saddled his donkey, travels home, gets his affairs in order, and then proceeds to hang himself. Again, I ask, does this look like or sound like the actions and attitude of a madman? No. People can sin deliberately and with thought. That's my point here. And I would argue that a demon-possessed person does not have to act stark raving mad either. Dr. Robert Hare wrote a very good book on psychopathy called Without Conscience. I would recommend that you check this book out if you ever get time. But he documents examples of people who are psychopaths who act normally and not as how we might think that a psychopath would act, as being a wild-eyed fanatic. And again, I'll repeat myself, there's no reason to think that demonic possession will always follow the exact same pattern, but such possession can and will lead to the same destination. Remember earlier when I talked about first principles, what does the thief come to do? He comes to steal, to kill, and to destroy. Do you always have to act berserk in order to steal, kill, or destroy? No, you don't always have to do that. Now, let's be fair. There are plenty of questions from my side to answer. And honestly, I think that these are fair questions. Number one, the origins of the devil. Where did he come from? The Bible doesn't say where he came from. Number two, why did God allow such a being to continue? Why did he? Beats me. I have no idea. Number three, how can such a being be permitted in the presence of God? Habakkuk chapter 1, verse 13, in Habakkuk's prayer to God, says that God's eyes are too pure to look upon evil. That's a fair point to raise. Now, there do seem to be other places in the scriptures where God does see the wickedness of man. So how do we reconcile those things? Maybe Habakkuk was being hyperbolic here. Leave it to your own judgment on that. Number four, the belief in Satan and demons. We need to be brutally honest. This has been a source of mischief and projection. If we're not careful, we end up placing the blame for our own wicked actions on someone else. A good parallel that I once heard about this is people misquote Paul in 1 Timothy 5 by saying that money is the root of all evil. It's not money that's the root of all evil. It's the love of money that is the root of all evil. But notice that when you say that money is the root of all evil, you're taking blame away from the person and placing it on someone else. We don't want to fall into that trap. What did I say earlier? Brother Larry Mayberry told me the ultimate responsibility for any wrongdoing is on us. The Bible is silent on the issue of angels having free will. Doesn't prove that they do, doesn't prove that they don't. I think a fair question, this is a fair question that they ask. If angels could fall despite being in the presence of God, then what guarantee is there that those of us who are in God's kingdom will not one day choose to rebel against him? I have no problem with speculating on the issues of things like, whether angels have free will and so on, but we need to remember that the Bible seems to be pretty silent about that point. And I do remember my friend, Brother Terry Robinson, giving an answer which he could far better articulate than I could when it comes to the issue of there's not going to ever be a rebellion in God's kingdom. It's going to be because we knew what was going on earth during sin, and we never want to go back to that. But again, he could articulate that better than I could. Terry, if you're out there listening, I hope maybe someday you can pass along something to Brother Carlos or others to be able to better explain that than I could. But still, I'm not going to take away from the fact that these are, among other things, fair points. And the terms, the title of devil and Satan, these are titles, not proper names. It's like saying, God's name is not God, it's Yahweh. Christ's name is not Christ, it's Jesus or Yeshua, depending upon how you want to go about pronouncing it. But the title of devil and Satan, they are used in reference to others. A handful of examples here. It's possible that it is used in reference to God, because when you look at 2 Samuel 24:1 and cross-reference that with 1 Chronicles 21:1, it does seem to set up God as being an adversary to King David. The angel opposing Balaam the sorcerer when he was blocking the road and the donkey kept stopping. He's called an adversary in Numbers 22:22. A man by the name of Hadad the Edomite who rebelled against King Solomon is called an adversary, a devil or a Satan. 1 Kings 11:14. Very well-known passage right here. The Apostle Peter is called Satan by Jesus. Get behind me, Satan, Matthew 16:23. And last for right here, Judas Iscariot is referred to as a devil at the tail end of John chapter 6. Have I not selected 12 of you, yet one of you is a devil. Now, I would contend, though, that just because that these titles are used in reference to others does not therefore exclude the possibility of Satan himself existing. It just simply means that his title and description can apply to more than just him, which goes back to the first weakness that I mentioned earlier on. That the points that they make about, he can refer to someone else, this name can refer to someone else, the source of sin and so on. It doesn't completely eliminate the possibility of Satan existing. Again, going back to where I think that both sides can agree, there are things that we need to stay away from, period, end of story. Regardless of how you go about defining who or what the devil is, don't associate yourselves with things such as described in Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 9 through 12. Whether it be sacrificing your children in the fire to idols or in the Planned Parenthood clinic to the gods of convenience. You don't do that. You don't practice divination or sorcery. You don't interpret omens, cast spells, witchcraft, or consult the dead, whether it be through seances or whatever it might be. We do not worship or honor or give ultimate glory to anyone besides our Father in heaven. Someone like me who believes in a supernatural being called the devil would say that to practice these things is to open yourself up to evil influences and even demonic possession, and you don't want that coming in to your mind. Which I think would make a fair first question when trying to evaluate whether someone has a problem with demon possession or has a problem with mental insanity. we should ask ourselves, is the person in question engaging in any or all of these practices? Are they playing with Ouija boards? Are they toying around with tarot cards? Are they visiting psychics? Are they taking their horoscope seriously? If they're doing these things and doing it consistently, I would be inclined to think that something spiritual may be going on in that person. I may not start there, but I would have to seriously consider it, because you're granting anyone or anything permission to enter your mind when you do things like this. Now, if you take the opposite position, someone that doesn't believe in a supernatural being would say that if you practice these things, your mind and your heart are going to wander away from God. You will end up worshiping God in ways that he forbids. See Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 30 and 31. That's at best, by the way. At worst, you may end up looking at these practices as being your God of sorts. You end up using them as a substitution for God, much in the same way that a greedy man would look at his money. His money becomes his God rather than the Father being his God. I'm going to wrap up, though, with a repeat of a previous verse. Well, there I go. I missed 2 slides. I do apologize for that. I'll wrap up with Deuteronomy 29:29, though. I read this verse earlier. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law. I said this earlier, and I'm going to say it again. We need to be reminded of this. There are things out there which man was not meant to handle or disturb or mess around with. Instead, you need to concentrate on the things that God has given you, and don't obsess with those things which God has said no to you, because we need to be warned. Our Heavenly Father is also a God who, from a spiritual point of view, will give a person what he asks for. If you ask for sin and wickedness, he'll give it to you. Look up Romans 1, verses 18 through 32, 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 5, Galatians 6, verses 7 and 8, the law of sowing and reaping. If you plant wickedness, you will reap death. On the other hand, if you ask God for holiness and righteousness, if you ask him for wisdom, the good news is he will give that to you. He'll give it to you liberally and freely. I want to thank you guys for listening to me. Somebody once said a long time ago that there are 2 kinds of people. There are those who have something to say, and then there are those who just say something. I hope I fell into the former category. I'm sure I haven't answered all the questions out there, but I still want to say thank you so much for this privilege to be here. And Brother Carlos, I'll turn it over to you, sir. Thank you.
No, thank you for that presentation. Very important in our circles. A lot of non-Trinitarians or Unitarians have questions or doubts about this subject.
Absolutely.
And others outright reject Satan, called the devil, as a real personal spiritual being or self. And I think just to add to what you've been saying, as a sort of form of a question, to play devil's advocate, no pun intended.
Bring it on. That's all right.
So it seems to me, Lonnie, from my interaction with this subject, I've done a debate on this issue as well. It seems that the Satan as a metaphorical presentation, right? So Satan, the devil, metaphor for evil or the sin nature, if you want to call it that. So it seems it's that interpretation is it's an outgrowth of the figure of Satan called the devil, lacking a clear biography in the scriptures. Is that a fair assessment of it?
Could be. If you're if I'm understanding the point correctly, are they saying that we don't have enough information, so therefore this is the conclusion we come to? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, so the argument is that Satan called the devil is a metaphor for evil
Right.
or fallen human nature because it lacks a clear what we would call biography in
Mm-hmm.
scripture. In other words, where it comes from, in the Old Testament, we don't have the origin story, if you will, of
Right.
the Satan called the devil. So it sounds like that's one of the big issues here with this interpretation of Satan called the devil as a metaphor for evil or fallen human nature.
Yeah, I see the point there. I don't know though. I go back to my first to the first weakness that I raised earlier on. Pardon me. I don't see how a lack of an origin story. Again, this is assuming that I'm understanding the point here. I'm not trying to set up a false premise or anything, but I honestly don't see how the lack of an origin story in of itself is proof for Satan being a metaphor. I don't know exactly and precisely where, for example, the material came from when God said that he created the heavens and the earth, other than it would have come out of himself. If God is of infinite power, then it would have come from himself. But other than that, I don't know the particulars about that. But that doesn't stop me from believing that God made the heavens and the earth over the course of 6 days. You see what I'm saying here? It just doesn't. I think that they have to come up with a point that shows that it would be impossible for him to exist. Now, that I recognize as dicey, okay? But still, it might be something, those of my brothers and sisters out there who don't believe in the devil, that might be something for you to work on. Maybe there are scriptural arguments which show that the devil absolutely doesn't exist. If that's the case, then bring them on, and I'm more than happy to hear them. You might have a point. I mean, we see through a glass darkly, as Paul once said. And I'm learning constantly. If I turn out to be wrong about this, then I hope that I'll have the humility and the grace to recognize that I'm wrong and change. I just want to align myself with what the truth is. You see what I'm saying?
Right. And we have some questions here from the live chat.
Here we go.
Let's see, before we wrap up tonight,
Yes,
and actually, just before we get to the questions, Pastor Lonnie, let me do this disclaimer. This presentation mentioned the word rape for purely educational purposes, so viewer discretion is advised due to sensitive content that sometimes is shown or heard through these presentations. And I'm just doing this for the sake of the YouTube guidelines regarding the word rape or suicide for that matter.
Yes.
And that's
Yes,
the word that was mentioned, suicide, and I should say not rape. So
no, that's okay. And in retrospect, I mean, I keep forgetting about the YouTube guidelines. I'll try to pay better attention to
oh
that
no,
next
it's
time. I
fine.
appreciate that.
No, it's totally fine. Not your fault, but just for YouTube to hear me as the host and the channel moderator. That's all. Let's see. Let's get to some of the questions here. Again, if anyone has any other questions, please type them in. We have some time this evening. And let us go. Actually, this is another sort of devil's advocate, Pastor Lonnie. The word Beelzebub is understood to mean the god of sickness or injury. So, wouldn't this mean that Jesus was casting out sicknesses or mental illness and not actual, persons or demons, individuals?
Maybe in some cases. But it does. I'm wanting to say that in the book of Matthew, I'm wanting to say somewhere in chapter 4, maybe in some other places, it does speak of healing diseases and casting out demons. There are two separate categories that are right there. that's a fair point that you're raising right there. I think it's
Right.
just, I think we had to look at the individual. We had to look at each individual healing that Jesus does in order to be able to determine one or the other. Go ahead, though.
Right. Context is king.
I think it is.
You mentioned Skinwalker Ranch, by the way. Can you, some of us might not know what Skinwalker Ranch is. You mentioned it briefly or described it briefly. Can you first tell us what Skinwalker Ranch is, and has
Well,
anyone seen it?
well, there is, okay, I need to give a disclaimer myself. I know about Skinwalker Ranch primarily because I listened to a podcast about it twice. And I'm not by any means an expert on this. You know, I'm not going to say that I've watched the video twice and therefore I know everything about it. But it is a place, I'm going to have to go back. You know, in retrospect, I should have gone back and listened to that podcast again so I could take down more details because I thought this question might have came up. But it is a place where people have documented a lot of very eerie and very strange supernatural things going on there. Whether it be dancing lights, whether it be people have witnessed portals opening up in places like this. There was an account of animals being, when no one was at the ranch at all, animals being moved from one place into a very tight compartment in another one. There was at this place, if memory serves, the owner of the place had a handful. Oh, thank you. Had a handful of dogs that wandered around the ranch that went chasing after something. And when the owner of the dogs finally found the dogs, let's just say that there wasn't very much of them left. I would recommend that you look this up for yourself. Like I said, that's on me. It would have been good for me to have done some listening to listen to it again and taken some more. Of course, the problem is, I'm limited on time, so I didn't know how much to talk about that and so on and so on. So I would recommend for those of you who are curious, check it out for yourself. I heard the podcast name that I heard about this is a podcast called Haunted Cosmos. Now, word of caution, Haunted Cosmos, these guys are Trinitarian and they're also post-millennial as well. So you got to take some of the things that they say about eschatology and so on with a bit of a grain of salt. But if you get past that, they got some very good information about what that place is. They don't give their presentation in a hysterical manner. They are very straightforward. They're very matter of fact when it comes to their descriptions. Not the wild-eyed screaming voice of a tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist.
Kingdom of God Ministry and Missions. Thank you, Brother Lonnie. Have you noticed if those who do not believe the devil is real, that they do not believe that there will be a final Antichrist too? Revelation says the beast, the Antichrist, is empowered by Satan.
Well, on the one hand, I would admit that I've never seen that connection, although to be fair, the things that I have read and that primarily the things I've read, the issue of end times never comes up. So I'm going to be honest, firsthand, I don't know if there's a connection between the two of them. That being said, if I was a person who didn't believe in the devil, my best guess would be that when this final man of sin comes up, he's probably going to, again, if I'm looking at the devil as being metaphorical for sin and the human condition, well, who's to say that he's not going to use all kinds of tricks, modern technology, et cetera, in order to make it appear that he's empowered by the devil. I don't think, though, that Tracy's point should be discounted, however. Maybe somebody who does not believe in the existence of the devil could expound more upon that. But I do think that's a fair point to raise. Where does the power of the final man of sin come from when it does say that, if memory serves, in Revelation 13, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the dragon gives his throne and his power to the man of sin. So what does that mean then? Might be, like I said, I think it's a fair question.
Right. All right. So thank you so much, Pastor, once again, Lonnie. Thanks for joining us. Your first time here. I hope you enjoyed it.
Well,
Thanks.
good Lord willing, and the creek don't rise. I hope it's not the last, and make it a little less controversial topic next time. No, I'm kidding. All right, hey guys, thank you so much. It was a real honor to be here. God bless you guys, and stay out of trouble wherever you are.
Thank you. Good night. So that was Pastor Lonnie Craig, The Existence of the Devil. Controversial topic, no doubt about it. All right, so that's it for this evening. Just a few more comments here on Lonnie. Very important, Brother Lonnie, in regard to opening yourself up to demons via games, movies, books, music, etc. And NJ says, thank you, great presentation. Meryl, very informative presentation. And Sharon Brown, thank you so much. People shy away from speaking out on this subject.